I think the universal systems, at least of the developed world, have no special new world to think about in the 21st century that they didn't think about in the end of the 20th century. So there's a tendency to talk in hyperbolic terms about aging, for example, in North America. But the aging that's going to take place in North America for the first 2 or 3 decades of the 21st century are exactly what happened in Northern Europe in the last 2 decades of the 20th century. So that leads me to suggest that demography is not destiny, even though it's often described as the key element of destiny. That's one. And even the concerns about aging having to do with the composition of the services that are going to be used. We have enough experience already with the kinds of services that are used. The magnitude may change, but it's not happening all of a sudden. So I would say that for me, the big challenge is to rediscover what it is that led so many countries to want to treat medical care as a special kind of good and service that needed to be shared in the financing of it, and think about how to combine that commitment to an understanding that how much you spend is a matter of the activities that you finance times their average price or their average cost. So I don't think there's a transformative change that's taking place. Now, that is of course quite different in a society like India or a society like China. Those are rapidly growing, dramatically transforming socioeconomic and political systems. But I don't know enough about those particularities that I can make an intelligent commentary on that, except that it's different. Well, I think the important adjustment to make is in the time frame that you're talking about. If you're interested in the process of moving to universal coverage, the relevant experience is when those other systems moved to universal insurance, and what seemed to be required at that time, what seemed to work poorly or well, what kind of mobilization of citizen beliefs and commitments were necessary, and what were the order of priorities, and do they seem the priorities that would be relevant to Latin American, South American countries. I think the tendency to use cross-national investigation to get at contemporary developments makes less sense as a first order of business when you're talking about steps that had not been taken before. I don't think there's a leapfrogging that can take place so easily. By the way, that means thinking about both counterparts in Latin America that are close together or farther apart, and comparators in Western Europe that are closer together or farther apart. All the same things I said about most different system design or most similar system design apply, even if you're talking about over time rather than at one time. It's a catchy phrase that I use to get your attention. But the belief is an important one to pay attention to. The belief that a program and a policy can be drawn because it looks to be the best in the world and located in another society with the likelihood that it will recreate itself exactly that way. That's the fallacious aspect of that, is that transplantation of programs and policies is moving from, to be sure, a more similar system, but it's still not the same system. And just the way rules for traffic don't work out the same way in Rio that they might do in El Salvador. So you need to take into account that what makes transplantation enthusiasm, or sometimes best practice is often the word for it, is because people are anxious to find out what to do, but they need to take a cautionary step and see whether or not you should begin with another assumption than naive transplantation. Well, health as a right is an aspirational policy, and efforts to expand insurance coverage are consistent with that unless they involve significant differences in the treatment of different citizens. There is some tension between multiplicity of programs to expand coverage and the commitment to equal citizenship claim. So I agree with that. But as I understand the discussion so far in this conference, the movement for health care for all on equal terms has lost some of its vigor. So there may be talk of reform, but remember, the word reform, it all depends on where you put the emphasis. If you say, we're interested in reform of X, it's not necessarily an improvement. Reforming could be positive, negative, neutral. It's just change. Whereas you announce that I'm a reform candidate for health care, you're implying that you're trying to improve as opposed to simply change. States need to take into account the likely effects of having a substantial private insurance sector, which is particularly when that's supported by tax expenditures or what you might call an in and out arrangement with the public system, as opposed to an exclusive private and an exclusive public. And as far as I can tell, in both Argentina and Brazil, it's in and out rather than parallel and separate. And that raises lots of fairness questions, lots of financial fairness questions, and it perpetuates advantages that people have because of their finance and not because of their medical care need.